My name is Walter Peters and welcome to the second part of my presentation for the course SPED206 Trends and Issues in Special Education. Acknowledgement. The researcher would like to thank the following persons for their support towards this study. First, I would like to thank God Almighty for his continuous support and guide, for his wisdom, knowledge, and understanding in helping and guiding me in completing this study. Next, I would like to thank the facilitator for this course, SPED206, Trends and Issues in Special Education, Ms. Michelle Braffett, for her knowledge which she has imparted in the successful completion of this course. And finally, I would like to thank all those persons who provided useful international journals that give relevant information which act as a guide in this study. Introduction. Most Caribbean countries are unprepared, lack major resources, and are at the birth in the adoption of the special and inclusive legislation and policies. The Caribbean nation has over the years strived towards having an inclusive education. As the birth of international legislation became more supportive or favorable, several Caribbean nations began to strive towards practicing an inclusive education. The Caribbean is made up of several island countries, which are washed by the Caribbean Sea. These countries have several commonalities, such as their history and culture, food, festivals, etc. The Caribbean region have shown interest in adopting and implementing policies that would cater for an inclusive education, especially having equal educational opportunities. However, many Caribbean countries still need to enforce the legislations and address the real issue on the inclusive education. There are several factors which are impeding in the adoption of inclusive education legislation in the Caribbean region. Some of these factors are lack of finance and support towards special education, little or no interest in implementing the legislations, negative attitudes towards an inclusive education, lack of resources, physical and human, in support of special education. I'm going to look specifically at the inclusion in Guyana. Inclusive education in Guyana. Guyana, for example, have made efforts to protect the rights of persons with disabilities by enforcing the Persons with Disability Act in 2010. The policy provided educational opportunities for persons with disabilities. The special needs community in Guyana continued to be at a disadvantage when it comes to education. Some of the reasons behind this is a lack of trained special education teachers and specialists. For the policy to achieve success, there must be improved special education resources and more trained teachers in special education. Also, some parents, teachers, and educators are reluctant in providing special education services and support. Furthermore, there is limited financial support towards an inclusive education. So in reality, in Guyana, the international legislations had played an important role in the implementation of inclusive education, but there is still greater efforts to be made for a thriving success of inclusive education, since students with disabilities face higher rates of poverty despite its thriving improvements in education for the past 20 years. Guyana shows to be at birth stage of an inclusive special education. Next, I'm going to look specifically at the inclusion of special education in the Bahamas. The Bahamas Persons with Disabilities Equal Opportunities Act was passed in 2014. The act came into effect and strives to protect the rights of persons with disabilities by any means to take legal action against any case who appear to discriminate persons of special needs community. Some of these factors are lack of training in the field of special education. According to International Journal of Special Education, reveal that there is a lack of trained teachers in the area of special education in the Bahamas. As a result of this, 60% of teachers demonstrated a negative attitude towards an inclusive education, and the remaining 30% displayed mixed feelings of implementing same. This international journal also mentioned that administrators also were not supportive enough towards inclusive special education. This was indicated by both primary and secondary teachers where administrators showed less interest in adopting special education. Next, according to the International Journal, there is inadequate resources to adapt an inclusive special education. More resources are necessary in order to adapt an inclusive education. This research also mentioned that there are misconceptions on the grounds of understanding inclusive education. Many of the teachers were not knowledgeable on the topic of inclusive education. So therefore, having all of the above mentioned factors have proven that the Caribbean region, the Bahamas, is not ready and prepared for the adaptation of special and inclusive education. Thirdly, I'm going to focus on the inclusive education in Jamaica. In Jamaica, the National Policy for Persons with Disabilities was passed in 2000. This legislation have made similar as the Guyana's Act. The Act provides the protection for the rights of individuals with disabilities. It protects against persons being discriminated and legal action can take against them. And according to the Task Force on Educational Reform Jamaica 2004, this practice is likely contrary to the international standards, which encourages inclusion, as shown that many children with special needs were not receiving appropriate education. Therefore, this had placed many Jamaican special needs children in a vulnerable at-risk state. Also, according to the International Journal, inclusion in Jamaica primary school teachers' self-efficacy, attitudes, and concerns have shown that special needs children were not identified for them to receive support in order to achieve appropriate education. This is according to the Task Force on Education Reform Jamaica 2004. Next, there were also insufficient funding to support the inclusive education from both the government and private sector in Jamaica. The International Journal also mentioned the lack of trained and specialized teachers in special education. Research have shown that ongoing training of teachers is pivotal in the adopting of special education. Recommendations and future considerations. In conclusion, Caribbean countries have made efforts to have an inclusive special education. However, there are several common factors which contributes to impede the process of special and inclusive education. Some of these common factors among the Caribbean countries are more trained teachers and specialists in the field of special education, adequate special education facilities, adequate funding to support the management of the special education community. There are several other Caribbean nations who also made effort in adopting special education policies, which they would also experience similar issues in implementing same. Therefore, after examining all of the above, most Caribbean countries are unprepared, lack major resources, and are at birth stage in the adoption of the special and inclusive legislation and policies. And this has brought me to the end of my presentation. If you look carefully, these are the sources in which the information were compiled or collected from the relevant references. Thank you for viewing my presentation.